Eskom's new board has a huge task ahead of the country as it continues to bear the brunt of the power cuts in various sectors of the economy. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan announcing the new board last week with the business leader Mpho Makwana appointed as that board's chairperson. Makwana joining us now to talk about his turnaround strategy for the power utility. Mr. Makwana, thank you very much for your time. Let me get straight into the issues because time is of the essence here. There is the expectation, and this would have been part of the minister's announcement of this board that you lead, that one of the key elements they expect you to deal with is that of the energy availability factor, which at the moment sits at 59%. Your challenge is to take it back up to 75 for all of these plants at Eskom. Do you think that that challenge you can meet?
So firstly, Kolile, good morning to you and ENCA viewers. We thank you for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation. I think that the key message I would want to leave with the people of South Africa is that the wisest thing to do for any new leader coming into an organization, even though I've been here before for 9 years, is to firstly recognize that between June 2011 and now, a good time has lapsed. Lots of changes have occurred at Eskom. The Eskom that I led when I was chair up to June of 2011 is not the same Eskom. So we would want to firstly be given the space to do a proper assessment. And the second thing I need to be upfront about is that as South Africans, as the media, as all the key stakeholders, we must guard against what I would call messianic tendencies to place hope in an individual. Eskom has got 39 to 40,000 very capable people, firstly. Secondly, this is a board of directors. It's not a one-person show in the office of the chair. Thirdly, I have had initial briefings starting on Sunday evening with the Eskom chief executive, where, among others, he shared with me the Eskom monthly reports that he has been sharing with the previous board. And perhaps also let me take this opportunity to thank Professor Makgoba and the previous board for the work they did holding the fort under very tough circumstances to ensure that they continued to support the Eskom leadership almost as a board that had very limited capacity in terms of its complement. So back to your point, we intend to visit power stations as part of our onboarding as a board to appraise ourselves on the ground with the facts on the ground. One of the things that we had put in place when I was initially chair and CEO in 2009 in the build-up to the FIFA World Cup, and subsequent CEOs, Brian Dammers and others, continued that, is at Megawatt Park we put together a nerve center that allowed you to see the activities at each and every power station from Megawatt Park. But that nerve center view can sometimes be deceiving because sometimes you've got to blend in with the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
We will appraise ourselves and then we will request a bit of space because I imagine that quarter to quarter, as the CEO does briefings, we will also have as the board to find a practical way of doing these briefings as well. But we would need a bit of space, 30 days, 60 days, just to familiarize ourselves properly with the power station so that I can intelligently say to you, because there are power stations that are already above the required energy availability factor threshold. So one power station might have an EAF above the norm, one below the norm, one perhaps mid-range. And these dynamics range from the type of leader you have as the power station manager. They range from the caliber of the team you have. It is not a secret that Eskom has been depleted of skills. And so we also need to familiarize ourselves. Then, once we have the facts at our disposal, I will be able to say at this pace, at this rate, we are going to be able to restore the energy availability factor from this power station to this point, so that the total average EAF is then where it should be.
Okay.
I do recall that the other advantage is that I do recall an Eskom that worked well. Remember in 2002, April, when I first became a director, the year prior, 2001, Eskom had been recognized as the global utility, power utility of the year. So I do have some memory of what a well-functional Eskom should look like. We also on the board have the benefit of someone like Clive Leroux, who's got 42 years experience running power stations, including where he used, when I worked there with him, he was at Kuberg. Subsequently, after I left, he's now retired. He has been the GM responsible for plant performance. We have also Dr. Rod Crompton, who we have the benefit that I've worked with him previously when he was one of the regulators at NERSA, and he's been on this previous board. So there's an element of continuity that we'll also be able to benefit from.
All right. Mr. Makwana, I'll forgive you for suggesting that we are a particular platform. This is Newsroom Africa, and you may be familiar with this voice from another channel. Let me then pick up on the skills set issue. I think viewers will be generous and say, okay, you're going to visit these power plants to see what the skill set looks like. But the one skills set, at least the one area of management that you surely will be familiar with, is the Eskom management at CEO, COO level. Do you think that that leadership has the right skills set to take Eskom to that energy availability factor of 75%?
So firstly, thanks for giving me, it shows I've been a fan of yours. That's why I remember you from the previous platform. No, the key thing for us as a board is that we have to assume office and give the existing team the benefit of the doubt. I said to the chief executive, together with the board, and also humbly requested the shareholder to take note of this when we had our first board meeting yesterday, that we are going to give the incumbent CEO and the incumbent CFO and ExCo members the benefit of the doubt. We are going to work with them to understand the existing strategy in the next few weeks, actually. And then we will, once we've familiarized ourselves with the strategy, we as a board need to also own it and make it our own. So there's possibilities that we may have recommendations to the shareholder and to our government leadership where we may suggest tweaks here and there, but the strategy is the strategy. We will then, from there, remember the financial year is almost nearing to the end. We'll then have to enter into new goal commitment contracts with a new executive team, and then we will hold them to account based on the performance that we shall have agreed with them as the new board. I know the CFO very well from previous engagements when I was involved with Eskom. He was the brains trust, among others, that understood the Eskom revenue model very well, that dealt with the regulator in terms of as and when we apply for tariffs. He was one of the brains trust. So I have confidence that Caleb understands the revenue model of Eskom. I have had initial discussions with Mr. Underdrater, as I said. I'm very confident that his heart is at the right place. We're all human. I think he's taken lots of battering from all sorts of quarters. But for him to have demonstrated the commitment that I have seen under these circumstances, we have to applaud him and support him for as long as he's group chief executive at Eskom.
Okay.
A good number of other members of the ExCo that I've worked with previously is the Human Capital Executive, Ms. Elsie Pule. She also did a stint at SARS in between her Eskom career, so she's known to me. Many other members of the executive team would have been in slightly lower levels in the organization when I was there, so I need to know them, be reintroduced to. I used to know in Eskom there's a structure called the Eskom Top 60, so to the extent that there's still a Top 60, I'm planning to have greets and meets with as many of those members of the Top 60,
okay,
including the power station managers. And then one can then factually say, once you've had those kind of engagements, post-onboarding, you can then start pronouncing on this and the other. But I think it will be unfair and premature at this point to make such pronouncements. I also want Kolile to take this opportunity to say to the 40,000 members of staff at Eskom, as this new board, we want to assure you that we're fully behind you. We understand where you've been. Kolile, in the last 3.5 to 4 years, the average Eskom employee hasn't really enjoyed performance incentives and those kind of things. And so we will be looking to how we reignite performance, how we reignite appropriate levels of incentivization, so that, human beings believe in effort and reward.
Okay.
Human beliefs enjoy being celebrated for their commitment and their performance, and we will be looking at how that can be done.
Okay, all right. We're going to pick up on those two crucial elements you've just mentioned. You already talking bonuses for the Eskom staff. I'm not sure that will sit well with the South African public, but also you've given yourself timelines as per your visit to the various power stations. I'm going to come back on that issue of a timeline. Let's pause there for a moment. Take a break. When we return, we continue the conversation. You're watching Newsfeed AM. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with Eskom's new board chairperson, Mpho Makwana. Mr. Makwana, thank you very much for staying with us. Let's pick up on the element of bonuses. Is that a wise thing for you to start contemplating before you even familiarize yourself with the problems at Eskom? Why do you want to do that when South Africans are very, very angry with the way that Eskom workers, perhaps they could feel, are conducting themselves? Not so long ago, there was a strike action which actually induced more stages of load shedding. Why would you want to talk bonuses now?
So the words that I used that I would request we stay aligned on is appropriate incentives. I am as angry, as concerned as any South African would be, because I'm not immune from load shedding. I also suffer load shedding where I live. I also suffer load shedding everywhere I drive where traffic lights are off and so on. I'm in business. I also suffer load shedding. My businesses suffer load shedding when they can't do what they're supposed to do to their key customers. But the key thing here is to recognize that we're dealing with human beings. Human beings work on the principle of what is in it for me. You're in the media communication space. They say there's a radio station called WIIFM. Every time you ask people to commit to something, especially when they have not really been rewarded in line with what the traditions used to be in this environment at Eskom, they will switch on that radio station. They will say, what is in it for me? So firstly, yes, we want them to say, what is in it for me is that South Africa first. We have to make our country work. In fact, decades ago, we used to call Escomites guardians of the economy, because the fully functioning Eskom is fully intertwined with a fully functioning economy. But we've got to recognize that human beings, especially this time we're finding ourselves post-pandemic, life is tough for everybody. And you're bound to find that at some point, people will ask and say, but how am I going to be incentivized for what I'm expected to do? Because it certainly is a tough assignment. So we will have to sit with all concerned, ground up, and agree how that is likely to be achieved.
Okay.
Of course, this entity is under the tight sort of watch of the fiscus, given that there's huge debt in the billions, in the hundreds of billions that the South African economy is carrying. I'm certain that before we even implement anything, we're going to have to consult again the shareholder, and through the shareholder, the treasury and other key players, to say, how do we inspire people to be part of the journey? Then we also need to look at our communities, our host communities in each area where there's a power station need to also join in and be part of the solution. They know the people who are damaging the power stations. They know the people who are stealing whatever they're stealing at the power stations. We also will be, as part of this onboarding, the shareholder minister is going to be introducing us to all the key players in the enforcement universe, so that we also are appraised of what is it that they're dealing with in terms of challenges.
Okay.
Around security of power stations.
All right. So let me hurry us along because of time constraints, and I apologize for that.
No, I understand.
You have given yourself 30 to 60 days to conduct what we could term the study tour of the Eskom power plants, including the skills set there. I think South Africans would also be
Let's call it onboarding, because study tours seem to have other connotations. We're a board that must come on board, and so we've got an onboarding program.
Okay. So South Africans would be keen to know, are you putting, or do you intend putting, a timeline on the performance or non-performance of the executive at Eskom, starting with Andre de Ruyter as CEO?
I think I addressed that comprehensively earlier, Mr. Mkambi, that we have to enter into all manner of performance contracts. Right now, as I speak to you, the urgent thing over and above load shedding is to sign off on the Eskom financial statements. I think you've heard a few times that they have been delayed. Now, people in the finance universe understand that when you're doing a comprehensive audit, so firstly, new auditors have been appointed. A new audit committee of the board will soon be confirmed. Once as a board we've ratified the new board committees. That audit and risk committee, together with the CFO and all the finance professionals in the whole of Eskom, will be aligned around signing off those numbers and bringing them to the board. So we must appreciate that this is a very complex, even in its best of times as a high-performing organization, it's a complex entity. And so we must appreciate that it means that you've got to move, yes, with speed, but in a responsible and coherent manner that ensures that, because, sometimes you rush through things and cause other problems. And so if we're to eliminate and at the same time deal with root causes, because only if we deal with root causes will we really solve these problems permanently.
Okay.
You've got to allow yourself well-considered thinking and time. And that's what we are appealing for from all the key stakeholders in the South African public. The load shedding will, with time, be dealt with urgency as and when plant availability is restored. But, we don't want to just patch plaster on the wound. We want to heal the wound, and so that takes time.
And that's exactly the point I want to come in at, because I'm so pressed for time. Are you giving yourselves a timeline? I spoke to your predecessor, the man who's just left the position you hold now, and he says, based on the advice of the experts, in a year's time, load shedding could be a thing of the past. Do you share the same sentiment? Do you agree with that timeline?
The 9 years I spent in Eskom taught me that one must guard against making populist statements. I'm not, at this point, going to make a populist statement and say load shedding will be done by date X. For the simple reason that and that's why I'm saying we're going to do ground up. At a power station, a lot of things happen. Procurement of key materials, primarily among them, coal takes place. In the bigger picture of Eskom, that is one of the biggest costs for Eskom. So when we do these ground-up site visits, we're not just going to look at how you flick a switch on and off to restore load shedding. We'll also be looking at this whole holistic value chain, so that when you go back to the board and you sit in a meeting, you're able to say, in 30 days, this is what we're able to do. In 100 days is what we can do. In a month, in a quarter, in half a year, in a year, that's what we can do. So what I'm prepared to commit to is that in a very short space of time, once we get into the rhythm of briefing South Africa frequently on the power status, we would have adopted a roadmap ratified by all members of the board. As I said at the outset, I'm part of a collective. And so as a collective, we will then adopt a roadmap that we will then share with South Africans to say, by quarter X, this is where we hope to be, and we'll come back around quarter X to brief you. Okay. By quarter Y, and so on. Because I think then that is the proper and responsible way of moving a very complex system.
All right.
In the past, we used to say, when you're a CEO of Eskom or a chair of Eskom, Eskom is actually not a company, it's an industry. You're moving, if you just look at Rotec in Eskom Enterprises, that's just a whole engineering division.
Yeah.
So you're moving an industry, and South Africans must appreciate that complexity.
All right, Mr. Makwana, let me do this, and I'm really sorry to cut in. I want to give us just a bit more time. So we're going to take the headlines. If you're still available, I'm going to take you immediately after the 11 o'clock headlines. Is that okay with you? Mr. Makwana, are you still there?
I'm still here, thank you.
Okay, great stuff. So we're going to continue with just a few more questions with Mr. Makwana. You're watching Newsfeed AM. We are a bit late for headlines, and that's because we are in conversation with the newly appointed chairperson of the Eskom board, Mr. Mpho Makwana, who continues the conversation with us. Let me thank you very much for extending your time with us. Very, very important matter that affects the entire country. Let's then pick up on what you think could be the immediate solution to load shedding. Yes, I know I'm using words that you may not be in favor of. You've already said you're not going to be using populist statements such as giving yourself deadlines as to when we can see the back of load shedding. But when it comes to renewables, which are now being punted as a possible solution, at least in the medium term, to try and deal with load shedding, do you think that renewable energy is going to be the solution in the interim to take us out of load shedding? And are you in favor of Eskom buying that renewable energy from independent power producers, or Eskom needing to capacitate or formulate its own capacity within when it comes to renewable energy? Why does Eskom need to buy it from independent power producers as opposed to getting it from within or developing that capacity?
So let's also, again, the thing we must always remember is that electricity provision occurs in a global context. So there's always valuable lessons that you can learn from others. So the first country that ever attempted to go totally, fully renewable, that are as endowed with sunshine as we are, was Spain. They learned very painfully lessons that almost bankrupt that economy. Germany also tried to go full-blown wind energy in the early days of the renewable energy bandwagon, and also learned some painful lessons. So a healthy energy mix is required in any economy in the world. We need to be guided by practical sense and sensibility, in my view. And it's a view that I'm sure I will, as I get more and more educated around the commitments that our own country has made to the global climate change situation. But too few countries in the world that produce what we produce, the scale we produce, have been able to totally rely on renewable energy as a power source. So that's the first context that we need to remember. The second part of the context that I would hope that every time I visit you in your studios or on digital platforms like this, we will also remember. The challenge that South Africa has is a unique challenge in terms of continuity of supply, and this is what I mean. If you look at us with 40-something thousand megawatts capacity installed, the nearest neighbor that has got some semblance of good capacity is probably between 2,000, 3,000 megawatts, thereabout. Two countries in our neighborhood can do that. I'm talking about SADC now. The balance of our countries, what they have, one country takes about 800 megawatts from South Africa. Other neighbors take something to the tune of 250, 500 or so megawatts. So the dilemma we face is that unlike if, for instance, we were in Europe, to take that quick example comparison from a SADC point of view, if I'm sitting as, say, Germany or Italy, and I'm out of power, I've got neighbors that I can draw and wheel power in to top up my shortfall. So part of the reason why we face serious dilemma when major power outage happens in terms of loss of megawatts from the grid is the fact that we don't have neighbors that can quickly and easily bail us out. So Eskom remains, at least Eskom generation remains an important facet of securing continuity of supply and ensuring reliable supply, as we all know and have been reminded so many times that disruptions occur to the economy when there's a shortfall. So I honestly don't see how renewable energy on its own can totally ameliorate our challenge. It can complement what we need for two purposes. It can complement what is required, again, in terms of beefing up here and there where there's shortage or in terms of where supply is unable to meet demand. Secondly, the renewable energy is important for climate mitigation.
Okay.
Equally, when we talk about coal, there's just in Mpumalanga alone, there's 11 towns and communities and surrounding communities that depend on coal for their existence. And so we would have, as Eskom, together with our principals in government, have to walk this tightrope quite carefully, because lives and livelihoods will be impacted upon. Certainly,
you're talking the same language, and I would want to think that that statement is going to make the Minister of Energy, Gwede Mantashe, quite a happy man. So does that mean then that for the foreseeable future, there's not going to be a rush to do away with coal and transition into renewables? Because we're told we have 400 years of coal supply.
So firstly, I don't have authority to speak on behalf of government in terms of government policy on this matter. The various ministers have their authority to speak. We operate within a framework that is set for Eskom by government policy, by regulatory, in terms of NERSA as a regulator. We will operate within that policy.
Okay. All right.
And the government will come and say to us, this is what we want you to do in terms of just transition. This is what we want you, because this entity is owned 100% by the state. The government will come and say to us, this is what, as shareholder, we want you to do in this and this, the other. All I'm saying is there's also practical considerations that anybody that is in electricity generation, such as Eskom, or anybody that may come in later as a private player, if they do happen to come in, is that you need to be realistic. So it's a paradox. You need to be realistic in saying, I'm part of a global universe, and the globe is trying to reduce CO2 emissions. You need to also be realistic and say, I'm part of a continent where the billions of Africans that live in this continent, certainly in South Africa, majority of them are in very dire poverty. And there's a transition that must happen. But whilst the rest of the world might be talking about transition, for the rest of ground up, from a poor community point of view, there's access. They don't even have access.
Okay.
So all these dynamics must be balanced. So I'm advocating for a balanced, pragmatic approach that ensures that you do preserve, because we all need to have a planet to live in. There's only one planet. You balance the needs to be responsive to saving the planet, while you're equally responsive to ensuring that you uplift communities bottom up, whilst you're equally ensuring that you secure the country with reliable energy.
I want to conclude the conversation with a question about politics. I'm sure politicians will be watching, or are probably watching this interview as we are conducting it right now. And one of the people, by the way, who also happens to be watching is the former chair of the Eskom board, the person who has just left, and insisting that I actually correct what I said earlier, and that is that he says he was advised by experts that the country could do away with load shedding within 2 years. You've already made your statement in that regard, that you're not going to try and be populist. That's just me correcting myself. But I want to conclude with a question around politics. And it has been said in the past that political meddling is going to remain a problem for some time. Just the other day, we have seen reports suggesting that Andre de Ruyter suspects that his conversations are possibly being listened to. That's under investigation right now, so no firm positions there. How do you plan to handle political pressure, as I'm sure it will come?
So, firstly, my mandate is not to enter into the political fray. My mandate is to lead a capable men of women as a board of directors. That board of directors reports to a shareholder minister, and we expect our shareholder minister to be the champion for the utility in terms of the relationship with the broader government sphere and also with the broader political sphere. What I do know from past experience is that we as members of the board, in fact, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the public sector, as a chair of a board, as a board member, you serve at the pleasure of your shareholder. And so at any given time, shareholders may take a view that they want a different core of leadership for the board of directors. What we've requested is that it should be done coherently. It should be hopefully done with a semblance of dignity. We all are part of communities, we're part of families, and therefore it does not serve any good if we simply rubbish each other's reputations just because you want to change the board. So firstly, my sense is, and the minister said this in his briefing on Friday, that our duty is to restore proper governance at Eskom. So we would hope that a formal mechanism of relationship and contact points would be created. I also know from experience in this sector that from time to time we'll be called to Parliament to account to a portfolio committee in whatever form or shape or in whatever sector that portfolio committee serves the Republic on. Again, there's a coordinated fashion that happens through the DPE's parliamentary office. So my sense, Paul, is that if we all do what we should do sensibly, in line with good governance, in line with good government principles, we should be able to together move the needle forward to restore Eskom's credibility to where it should be. But to the extent that we start tripping over each other, be it from whatever quarter of this very complex stakeholder universe, we will then find that we will just be perpetuating the problem, and Eskom will find itself in a tailspin where once again you've got this board coming in, coming out, coming in, and that's not good, because the average utility in the world, their minimum planning horizon is 10 years. Their standard planning horizon is 20 years. And we must guard against just willy-nilly disrupting this very important utility at a time when not just South Africa, but the whole world is grappling with very tough economic choices about recovery from the pandemic. Globally challenged in terms of inflation. There's also a new term that economists are telling us that we're also faced with something called stagnation. So there's a whole host of challenges that really we cannot begin to recover and deal with successfully as a nation if we're going to be meddling with an entity that is this important to the economy.
Paul Makwana, let me thank you very much for your time and indeed extending your time with us. Newly appointed Eskom Board Chairperson, and good luck to you, sir.